All right, how's everybody doing today? Today's lesson is going to be learning the note names for the treble clef and for the bass clef. And I'm going to try to use my computer program here to show you how these work. So let's get started. First, you'll notice we have our two staff lines. We've got our treble clef and we've got our bass clef. Treble clef up top. And instruments that use the treble clef are flute, oboe, clarinet, saxophone, trumpet, French horn, and percussion. So most of our instruments read in the treble clef. You know, these are also the higher pitched instruments. And down here we have the bass clef. And instruments in the bass clef are bassoon, trombone, baritone, which we also are calling the euphonium, and the tuba. Later on, French horn and percussion will also learn some bass clef when we get into extended range, but for now, we'll just do this. Alrighty, let's get started. So the notes we're going to start with are the lines. And we'll start with treble clef lines. And notice when I place the note, that note evenly splits the line. And you can see the line running through the center of that note. You're going to be practicing writing some notes, and it's really important that you are very careful in how you write that. So let's talk about the names of these notes. The first note we did was E. The second note is G. Third note is B. Fourth line is D. And then finally F. Now notice I'm counting my lines 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I'm counting up the lines from the bottom to the top. That's important to remember, so don't forget that. All right, let's continue with the treble clef. And we're going to do the spaces now. I'm going to slide over just a little bit here. You notice how these are exactly in the center of the space. Remember, we talked about the staff having 5 lines and 4 spaces, and that's true for the bass clef and the treble clef. Notice how the circle is completely in the space. It doesn't overlap a line. That's important as you're writing. Okay, our first space is F. Our second space is A. Third space is C. And our top space is E. Look, that spells face. That's an easy way to remember the spaces of the treble clef is space rhymes with face. Don't forget that. So what's an easy way to learn the lines? I've heard different ways. I've heard Elvis's guitar broke down Friday. Every good burger deserves fries. You can come up with all kinds of different ways to remember that. Let's do every good burger deserves, can't type, deserves fries. And that should be a good way for you to remember the lines and the spaces, FACE. Take a second, if you will, and try to commit that to memory. And now we'll go on to the bass clef. All right, so on our bass clef, the same rules apply. We have notes that start on our lines. And we have notes that fall into the spaces. Okay, so let's talk about what these names are. They're slightly different. It's the same 7 letters, A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, and it's just in a different order. So our first space, our first line is G. Our next line is B. Third is D. Fourth is F. Easy way to remember fourth is F. Fourth, F, fourth. Also, the 2 dots right here split that line, so we can remember that that's the F. And A is our top line. So as you see, you've got our alphabet starting again, just in a different order than treble clef. And I always like to say, good burgers deserve fries always. That's how I've always learned the lines of the bass clef. Okay, let's do the spaces. The first space is A. Second space is C. Third space is E. And the fourth space is G. And so now we can remember this one. You got a couple different ways to remember this one. One is all cars eat gas. Or another one is all cows eat grass. You can come up with any little saying to help you remember the spaces, but we use these little tricks, to help us as we learn our lines and our spaces. Now, I want to show you one other thing. And this is, I might have to change the setting just a little bit so it all fits together. First off, we have our lines. Oops. Notice it's putting in a rest in between. And we'll fill that in just a second. Okay, so there's our lines. And remember, our lines are every good boy does fine. E, G, B, D, and F. Why don't we go ahead and put those in to help us remember. E, G, B, D, and F. Now I'm going to take these rest away and I'm going to fill them in with our spaces. Remember, our spaces were F, A, C, E. Now watch what happens when I put those letters in. Remember, our spaces spell face. Do you see the alphabet? we didn't necessarily start with A, but can you see that all the letters that are alternating line and space, line and space, line and space, line and space, we have our alphabet starting to form. A, B, C, D, E, F, and it would keep going. Let's do the bass clef. Let's see if the alphabet translates to the bass clef as well. So I'm going to do the same thing with our lines first. Okay. And remember, our lines are, remember them? G, B, D, F, and A. Okay. No alphabet there yet. Let's add in the spaces. All cows eat grass. Do you see the alphabet? So as you can see, both clefs, treble clef and bass clef, operate in alphabetical order when the notes are going from a lower pitch at the bottom of the staff to a higher pitch at the top of the staff. And hopefully you could hear as I was adding the notes, the sound got higher as I added the notes in. These are the lines and the spaces of each clef. There are two more notes that I want to add to this. And it's just to show you that the clef keeps going. Okay, so notice we have a rest here. I've used up all my lines. So now I'm just going to go up here and I could keep adding notes. And notice the next note that I add is going to have one of those ledger lines that we talked about in our first lesson. And then it would just continue. And I can keep adding notes and ledger lines for as long as I want to. See, I could just keep on right on going. We're not going to go that far today, but I do want you to at least know these two. A lot of people say, okay, well, if we start over and we went every good boy does fine, well, that must be every again because we're starting over. But that's not the case. We are still alternating lines and spaces here. Check it out. I've got, starting at C, I've got a line, and then a D is a space, E is a line, F is a space. The next letter in my alphabet, this has to be G. And because my next, I'm going line, space, line, this has to be A. Line, space, B. And the alphabet would continue, C, D, and so on and so forth. The same thing happens if we go lower. So let's put some notes here. Well, let me do the bass clef first. How about that? So bass clef, same way as we walk up, line, space, line, space, line. Our next note would be in the space right above the staff. And then we have a line, and then a space, oops, and then a line, and then a space. See, it looks the same as the treble clef, but they're different notes. Again, we're in alphabetical order. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. A, this one becomes B. continuing our alphabetical order, C, D, E, and we would keep going F and so forth. So can you see now how while the notes are going from low to high, we continue in alphabetical order, A, B, C, D, E. Okay? Now, what about below the staff? So let's say that I'm starting at let's start right here. And then the treble clef, we know that that note is on the second line, every good. So it's a G. Then we go down to F. Why did I go down? Because it's the first space and I'm going lower. So now I have to say my alphabet backwards. G, F, E, D, C, B, A. G, F, E. The next note, because we're going to keep our alphabet, we're going to a space, D. And the ledger lines start appearing down below. So let's talk about those. Notice the difference in the pattern of the notes. I'm going down. So we have G, F, E, D, C, B, A. So there's my alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. But because the notes are getting lower and not higher, our alphabet appears backwards. We'll talk about that more when you get back into the classroom, but that gives you an introduction on that. Bass clef works the same way. So we'll start here. And you can hear the sound getting lower. Okay, so again, backwards alphabet. This is the second line of the bass clef. So we know we have to say good burgers. So that's a B. This is the first space. All cows eat grass. This is all, or A. Here's our good burgers. Okay. And then we keep going backwards in our alphabet. What letter comes before G? F. Before E, F, E. Then D, then C, then B. And it would just keep going if I wanted to. I could keep going lower and lower and lower, and we would just keep adding the ledger lines until we couldn't add them anymore. But theoretically, we could keep adding them all the way. It stops here because that's where the piano stops. So those are the notes and how they work. Okay, let's do a quick review. Treble clef lines. Say them with me. Ready? Go. E, G, B, D, F. Bass clef lines. G, B, D, F, A. Treble clef spaces. F, A, C, E. Bass clef spaces. A, C, E, G. And when you put them all together, you get your musical alphabet, and you can see in alphabetical order. We extend the staff by continuing lines and spaces and using ledger lines. And you'll practice writing those next week in class some as well. And the ledger lines can extend above the staff or below the staff. When the notes are going from low to high, you stay in alphabetical order. When the notes are going from high to low, your alphabet goes backwards. You may have to watch this a couple times, commit it to memory. Use the sheet that I gave you, the packet on note names of the treble and bass clef and the note review to practice doing some of these. This is a really important step in learning to read music. Email me if you have any questions. We'll see you soon.